All right, good afternoon, listeners. My name is Nick Dinsmoor. I'm a guest moderator of the Wireless Buffet, a podcast that talks about interesting things in technology and specifically in the wireless world. And today we have some great guests. We have Al Brown, who is the president and CEO of SmartWAVE Technologies. And we have Jim Kerr, who is a principal of KB and Associates, as well as that runs the software as a service technology ERate ProfitWorks. Gentlemen, welcome to the Wireless Buffet, and I'm looking forward to a good conversation today.
Thank you, Nick. Glad to be here once again on this Wireless Buffet as we expand our topics of everything wireless. And glad to have Jim on the podcast today. Jim, and your experience with ERate should make it an entertaining one, at least as entertaining as an ERate can be. All right.
Yeah, it's E-rates can be a little dry. How's that? So,
well, gentlemen, it is that time of year. As we record this episode, we're getting into the holiday season. So, there's obviously a lot to be thankful for. And I think a lot of institutions can be thankful for ERate. Maybe it's dry, but it does serve an amazing purpose and helps a lot of students and communities around the country. So maybe just to kick off, it'd be great, Jim, just to give us, what are the basics? What is, the term E-rate's thrown around a lot, the term SLED's thrown around a lot. Let's just break it down. What is E-rate?
E-rate stands for Education Rate. It is a part of the FCC's Telecommunications Act of 1996 mandate, provide technology solutions in a cost-effective manner to schools, all schools that register as not-for-profit schools in the United States, and K-12 specifically, and then libraries, public libraries not associated with the school.
And what kind of money is allocated, though? I mean, when you think about, there's a lot of government programs, clearly, and there's even more, seems like daily we're adding to the pool. What type of funds are available for E-rate?
$4 billion annually.
Is that all?
It's a chunk change, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's got a B behind it. It's, So $4 billion annually for all those categories. And so is all that money captured and used every year?
No. And in fact, they added to the program $1.5 billion back in 2015. And since then, with some changes that they've made to the program, there's been a surplus of money every year for the last 6 years.
What happens to the surplus, Jim, with the extra money?
It gets rolled over into next funding year. So at this point, we have roughly about $6 billion in funding available to schools and libraries that would not normally be there if they decided to take advantage of it and fully populate. The changes that they made back in 2015 have really done a good job of managing the funding, because up until that point, it was kind of a free-for-all. And we ran out of money every year at the $2.5 billion level. And then the technology infrastructure, the actual wireless stuff that we're talking about today, didn't get funded oftentimes for the neediest school districts. And so they went begging, and they made some changes to the program, and it's had a very positive effect over the last 6 years.
So if a lot of these, the money wasn't being spent, was it literally because, the classification of what would be covered, or was it people just didn't apply?
Up until 2015, the program actually ran out of money. So every year there was not a surplus. And then in 2015, they introduced what's called the Category 2 budget. As opposed to the old 2 and 5 rule, they introduced what's called the Category 2 budget, which allocates X number of dollars per student for a 5-year period. And so they can utilize and maximize that funding, but it tends to level out the amount of money being spent every year. And prior to that, you get very large school districts. Los Angeles Unified, New York City School District would apply and just suck up all the oxygen out of the room, basically. And so now have it's a trickle down, even the smallest school district with the wealthiest students in the world kind of thing. You take Larry Ellison's backyard up in the peninsula San Francisco Bay Area or something like that. Those were 20% school districts that really had no shot at getting any money at all. And now they can actually apply based on the allocation of funding. So it's a good thing.
Well, that does sound like a positive change, right?
Yep.
And truly no child left behind in that situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very good. And then for the matching funds, how do the schools, if it's a 20% school district, maybe Jim, just for the podcast, just explain kind of what does that mean? How does that number created? All that good stuff.
So schools are rated based on the number of free and reduced lunch, national school lunch program students they have in their district. So it's a measure of poverty. And the higher the percentage of participation in a national school lunch program, the higher the discount level that a school district or library system would get based on that number. So at 75%, or if there's 75 kids out of 100 that are receiving school lunch program funding, they're going to get an 85% discount or end up paying 15 cents on the dollar for wireless infrastructure. Or at the low end of the scale, if they have 0 kids, literally they're the richest school district in the nation kind of thing, they still get a 20% discount.
So it's trying to essentially, if you can, any article you'll read daily, is we talk a lot about digital equity, digital divide. So it's focused on not just the folks that are in poverty, but even, if they're any student essentially that needs access, needs broadband, they're going to get some discount. The discount volume or percentage of discount is just determined by the school lunches.
It's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not based on an individual student. It's based on a district-wide. So the district spends the money on a district-wide basis. Unlike the most recent Emergency Connectivity Fund, which is truly targeted and focused at individual students, this is on a student-wide basis or student body-wide basis.
Okay.
So, obviously the folks that know a little bit more about ERate would say it's a very complicated program, and it is probably why obviously you do what you do and have the ability to help school systems and libraries. What do you think the biggest pain point of trying to leverage this type of funding is?
It is a government bureaucracy. No two ways about it. It can be challenging. There are rules of the road. You don't just get to pick what you want to buy. You have to go through a competitive bidding process. So an applicant, school or library, really needs to toe the line and adhere to open and competitive and fair processes to acquire this technology infrastructure. And a lot of them don't like to play that way. Frankly, they want to buy what they want to buy. So that's an impediment. If you're a small school district, and let's say you're going to get $25,000 or $50,000, really, really small rural type environment. Well, that's a lot of paperwork and pain to go through for not a huge amount of money reward. It's money, and we like to say in our end of the business that the applicant has a fiduciary responsibility to utilize all funding resources available to them. It is what it is, but it's not necessarily easy. So, if you're planning on hitting the easy button and the money flows in, it doesn't work that way.
You would advance wireless technology, and then you have government bureaucracy, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what, for those listening out in the USAC world, I apologize in advance for my next comment, but let's face it, this program was written by lawyers that don't necessarily have real world experience in technology infrastructure, either the delivery of it or the utilization of it. So, back at the FCC, some bright attorney put some really good language together, but it is convoluted in some respects. So it can be challenging. No two ways about it.
And Jim, on the funding is primarily used for, or all of it's used for infrastructure on campus. Is that correct?
So there are 2 categories of service for ERate. There is what's called Category 1, which is your telecommunications and wide area networking services. And those are typically provided by a carrier. And then there's Category 2, which is kind of an umbrella for the support on the services i.e. if you're buying a wireless network, for instance, you can buy the wireless network through what's called internal connections, but then you have to manage it and maintain it. So there are two other subcategories within category 2, which is managed internal broadband services and basic maintenance on internal connections to support and manage the project once you're done with the installation and implementation.
Okay. And with the pandemic last year, you hear a lot of innovative ideas, new ideas, MiFi hotspots on buses. A lot of MiFis were being handed out. Were those paid via ERate funds or no?
Nope. Yeah, there's so those were paid through the Emergency Connectivity Fund or other funding mechanisms. The relief efforts. There were three relief efforts for billions of dollars. The total sum was somewhere in the neighborhood of $252 billion thrown at K-12 education and libraries over the course of the last year and a half through the pandemic. So there's been a ton of money thrown at it for other things. And those are like ESSER funds, emergency secondary education relief and emergency relief funding and those kinds of things. So there's been a ton of money thrown at it outside of ERate. And so a really smart school district, what they'll do is they'll take and say, okay, I need to buy this infrastructure on campus, but I have some ESSER funds left over here. I can marry the two and really leverage up complete government funding for 100% of a wireless project, as an example.
Okay.
They've also been doing things like a lot of wireless or a lot of districts and libraries have been putting up wireless out in the public space outside the doors so that people can do drive-bys, that kind of thing, and actually do things wirelessly and gain access to the internet.
Like a park and serve type solution.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Do you see any potential changes? Because I hear some people say, well, I think the FCC is going to change some rules to where we can overcome this challenge of serving the kids, especially if it's a shelter in place. And you're spending the same amount of money for connectivity in the school building. If they're not in the school building using that, can it be extended to serve a community?
So not with ERate funds today. And I don't see that changing. It's going to be an on-campus solution. And as we go more to both hybrid and remote and on-campus kinds of situations, those networks are going to be stretched. And what we're finding is that there really is a need for more expansion of the on-campus broadband. When you see something like a hybrid classroom where you have half the class in school and half the class off campus at their homes or wherever that might be, doing their remote or distance learning applications, that puts a tremendous strain on a network. I mean, that's huge. You have basically 30 real-time simultaneous connections aimed at that one classroom, multiply that times 20 in a small school. In a large high school environment, that could be 67 classrooms. It's brutal. And so they really do need to up their game as far as their networks are concerned. And that's what we're seeing and what we saw last year's applications and this year's applications. They didn't slow down at all as far as the infrastructure on campus.
Right.
Where we see the delays right now potential changes are with school buses and making them eligible. They were made eligible under the Emergency Connectivity Fund program. We see that happening potentially under ERate. The other thing we see is cybersecurity. The number one target, according to the FBI, of cybersecurity fraud or ransomware attacks is school districts, believe it or not, because they can scrape a lot of information out of their student information systems and that sort of thing that they can then use for youngsters. And so, who knows what kids' social security number is being used for when they're in the first grade, right? But guess what? That's a prime target. So we're seeing a lot of cybersecurity discussions. With the makeup of the FCC commission today, with an acting commissioner that has not been, she's been nominated now to be the full-time commissioner, but she's acting in her capacity at this point in time. And with one seat open and just now announced as a nomination, we really haven't had a full makeup to the FCC to make any decisions. And obviously there's some, R's versus D's kind of stuff going on as well at that level. And that's created a delay in what we think is going to happen. We think based on some latest events, i.e. one of the commissioner's kids' schools was hacked recently, and that's changed their thinking a little bit on security, that kind of thing. We see that there's impetus along with a lot of community support for making cybersecurity, as an example, 100% eligible. I'm not sure that that's going to happen within the confines of what's about to be announced. The eligible services list is about to come out. We're hopeful that there may be some tweaks to that to open that language up a little bit for cybersecurity. Whether they can make full school buses wholesale eligible or not, it's a whole different discussion. And we think that those are going to be report and order kinds of situations. So again, it's hopefully it's good news, but it's a delay mode at this point.
So what's the date for the ESL?
That's a good question. If you go back, I was just somebody just pinged me last night, as a matter of fact, going, what are they waiting for? And the answer is, we don't know. It's, who knows what shadows lurks in the minds of men kind of thing. I'll date myself a little bit. The reality is that, with what we hope are the changes, every day of delay is good news, in my opinion. And normally we would have seen it about now. So I expect it this week, frankly, or next week at the latest. It would be a little bit extraordinary if it wasn't announced before the end of November. That'd be a little different. So I expect it any day.
Okay. Do you see, maybe this to Al, we think about, you obviously work with a lot of different entities. Are you seeing, the need for that? When you think about the ESL, like that list basically says what qualifies, right? Are you seeing things, or have you heard institutions say, hey, I wish this was qualified because then I could help expand my wireless network, I could expand the services I offer even more?
Absolutely. Last year we built a number of community wireless broadband networks, and these projects were led by the school district, but typically they partner with the city, because when you build these infrastructures, they can support the community as well as the students, right? And there's a need for both. And how we configure those networks are, we will broadcast an SSID for the school district, and we will route that traffic back to the school district. So when the student goes home, they can open up their Chromebook or laptop or whatever their device is. It's broadcasting the same SSID in the community as it broadcasts at their school. So that way it automatically connects to that network SSID, that network name, and then it will route that traffic so that it authenticates with the existing school's infrastructure authentication services. So it goes through their firewall, through their filtering service. It gives them access to their applications as a secured connection. What's great about that type of approach is that it was a very easy lift for these school districts, because they already had core infrastructure like firewalls, filtering, all of those services sized out to support the number of clients, the number of students for the network. So it would use the existing internet services, but from a payment standpoint, they couldn't pay for it with ERate funds, right? So it's somewhat of a burden in that you had to go through this calculation and apportion that out, right? Whereas if they were in the school doing those same things, they would have got their full money's worth for the internet services they were paying for. Now, in the community, because we could split it up like that, if there was also an SSID that would broadcast for public access, just like as it was in Wi-Fi access in City Hall, for example. And that traffic would go in a different direction. It would route in a different direction. It would route back to the city's firewall and internet services. So all the traffic flow was paid for in that manner. And that way it helped the two entities keep track of their budget and their spend for supporting the respective communities or constituents, right, throughout the community. So if E-rate and if the FCC were to make a change like that, I just think it's I just think it would add tremendous benefit to the students as we move forward, knowing what can happen in a pandemic, but also to give more of that option of learning outside of the classroom. If, in a lot of these communities, especially in those where we built the majority of these networks, these more of a digital divide type of service offering, if you will, they may not have a means to get to school on certain days. They may have to take care of a family member. There may be some other things that they have to manage in their day-to-day life, but it would still give them access to learning, despite whatever challenges they have ahead of them. But I don't, Jim, you say you don't see that coming. I hope you're wrong on that one, but you're definitely into it a lot more than I am. That's
I don't see ERate having an off-campus modality, if you will. But there is good news, and the good news is that with the latest passage by Congress of the infrastructure bill, there is $65 billion for broadband in that bill. And there's a lot of grant money available that school districts could apply for if they so desire, to do just exactly what you're talking about, doing a CBRS or private LTE type of environment for off-campus access. And when they start to do that with their, in partnership with their local communities, even local first responders that gives them an advantage. You go to some of these places that are really, there's several moves afoot, okay? One is that they really need to understand what coverage actually is for broadband, both for cellular as well as terrestrial based. That broadband mapping is really off, it's off kilter right now. And so,
sure.
In front of Congress, the FCC chairwoman admitted that and said that they're trying to actively fix that. And there's been a lot of efforts to fix it. When you get 3 carriers and I'll say, hey, everything's hunky-dory, everybody has access. And then you go into the downtown core, which is the poorest section oftentimes, and you can't get 3G on your phone, there's a problem somewhere. And we've done some of those experiments with some of my clients, and they've gone, okay, we have a problem. These kids literally can't get internet access through a cellular connection that's good enough. And oh, by the way, when you try and go to the local carrier and try and get them to install a internet access broadband connection on land-based, they're going, no, because we don't have last mile there or whatever. And so really, it is a challenge that even in downtown core spaces sometimes where you have a problem like that. So I think that they're trying to address it, but I don't think it's going to be through you, honestly.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jim. And it is it is somewhat misleading on accessibility, right, in some of these areas. But one thing in the broadband mapping is it's all off, right? I know it's off because I can go with my phone in an area where I'm supposed to be covered and I have no connectivity. But on top of that, some of the things that we're finding, especially in these neighborhoods we're going into, even if there is the service, it's not an accessibility problem, it's an affordability problem.
Absolutely.
And that is something that's never talked about, right? And that's what's really exciting when we go into these communities. And it may be CBRS, private LTE, but to be honest, we've had a lot of success, a tremendous amount of success with these large community Wi-Fi networks, like a mesh Wi-Fi solution.
Sure.
And part of the reasons for this success is the adaptability is so high to the offering, the adoption rates, because everyone has a Wi-Fi device.
Yep.
Right. So you don't have to hand out CPEs, you don't have to hand them advice. It broadcasts, they get on, they're like, wow, this is fantastic. I didn't even know I had connectivity. Now I'm, doing all this kind of stuff, and the amount of data consumption's amazing. We at SmartWAVE, we try to fit the right solution into the right area based on the assets available and other certain things. But with respect to impacting these communities, just to be able to serve, some of these kids, you see them, even if they have to go outside their home for the connectivity, they have an option. They have some way to stay connected, right? So it's been pretty exciting. So anytime these schools or these cities get involved, we try to get the school district and the city or county to engage, because they're serving the same entity, if you will, right? And if you can bring that community uprising, I just think from a smart city play, right, you get a more educated community, you have an opportunity for more jobs, higher salaries, that leads to tax revenue, which is how a city operates, right? So I just think it's a good long-term investment. So we're excited about the infrastructure plan, but however we can augment that or supplement it with ERate funding, it just helps that sustainability model as time goes on. So
we can probably agree though that I mean, with the billions of dollars in E-rate, the infrastructure, it seems like we're at a point where there's more money than there's ever been, period.
Absolutely.
So, but I've also, depends on, what you read, you can also say there's all this money, but there's two issues. One, the money's not being actually given out, right? It sits with Treasury, or it's not being flowing to the fast. But also, just I guess for both of you, I mean, now that the money's there, both from E-rate and infrastructure and grants, all these things, what is your advice to these school systems, to these cities? How do they? I mean, it is work. It's not like it's not work to try to do filings, to try to figure things out, to talk to the right manufacturers or partners, or what technology do I use? Do I use this? This box over here or this box over here? Do I partner? Like, for somebody who's, even if they've got an IT director, have a CIO, or they have somebody in these systems, it's still not simple, right?
No.
So
I think
more.
with anything like that, Nick, I think you really got to rely on experience if you want to go fast, right? I mean, like a company like Jim has, he's been doing this, forever, right? So I just think about it like this too, like the same thing with like getting your car done, right? Or if you have something mechanical problem, you take it in, you could go to a cheaper mechanic, but they may have to learn. It may take them some time to figure it out. And we believe that from a technology standpoint, we believe that you can figure most stuff out, but what's the opportunity cost, right? If it takes you, 6 months longer to provide for a network deployment that people can actually use, then that's 6 months of an opportunity cost of someone getting a job, of someone making their grades, of not skipping another semester in school, right?
Or staying out of the system, or whatever that may be.
Exactly, Jim. Great point, right? So that's one of the things. Been there, done that is something. I just think, when there is a lot of money like this, there's always an opportunity for someone to try to do something they're not, qualified to do, because that's where the money is. Yeah. So I think everyone's kind of watch out for that, right?
Yeah. And there are great resources out there as well. There are manufacturer programs that will put you together with a grant resource and tell you exactly what you're eligible for in your locale and based on your entity. And oftentimes those are the initial, consultation and the list of grants that you're potentially available. Their opportunities for you are free consultations, and the manufacturers are more than willing to do that because they're putting skin in the game at this point. So, I would suggest that there's lots of resources out there for the utilization of the funding that's out there. And some of it's just flat out free money. If you take $250 billion and divide that by 50 million kids, which is roughly the number of K-12 students we have in the United States at a given point in time, roughly 50 million, 55 million. There's some that are homeschooled, et cetera. That equates to $5,000 a kid. That goes a long ways.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
a lot of PPE, but it also buys a lot of infrastructure on a per kid basis. And then on top of that, there's things like the new emergency broadband benefit program, which was the low income support mechanism. That's just been expanded and reintroduced with additional funding. So there's other resources to help with folks get to where they need to be.
So as we go into, I mean, obviously the year's winding down and we go into 2022, lots of money to be spent. Al, I think you actually make a really great point about, because I've seen a couple articles about this, the risk of unqualified people trying to, I mean, sadly game the system, right? I mean, they're trying to get money and at the expense, which is, you know, it's horrible. You're at the expense of a student or expense of a school system. Like I mean, that's clearly morally questionable when you're taking money
exactly
for a school to do things that aren't legit. But you know, if you guys could give, you know, advice, you know, the tangible advice of what to do next, right? If any of these schools out there listening, or you know, we're talking to, what's those one or two things that they should be thinking about as the ESL comes out, as the dates for ERate are happening? What are the things they should really be considering as we're winding down the year? We'll start with you, Jim.
Okay, so like any other organization, schools and libraries are no different from a infrastructure perspective. You have to do some sort of a needs assessment. The next step, though, is unlike a private sector where it's here's the budget, here's how much money we have to spend. That's kind of unknown at this point in time as to what resources you have at your disposal to go forward with your project. Define your projects. Go to your manufacturers and figure out what those projects are going to cost, so you have a good idea what it's going to be like when you actually try and, you know, when rubber hits the road. And then from there, rely on those resources that are out there. And there's a ton of them. Just all you got to do is type in, you know, help me with my grant type stuff, and you will get a lot of resources. There are manufacturers, one that Alan, we're all aware of, who's helping to sponsor this. Has a program. CommScope Ruckus has a program to help folks figure out what resources are available to them. And all you have to do is contact your Ruckus CommScope rep, and they will help you through that process. And it's free to a point. Granted, if you get to the point where you're actually going to try and apply, the application process is not free, never will be, but it can point you in the right direction. And so I'd highly recommend that. Once you know what your programs and needs are, then like every other organization, you got to figure out how I'm going to pay for it. And that's step one. There's a lot of money out there. There's all kinds of new programs coming out, new grants under that $65 billion with the latest stimulus package, or, you know, infrastructure package, whatever you want to call it. There's a ton of money that's coming for infrastructure and for wireless. So there you go.
Awesome. Al?
And then from my standpoint, kind of along the same lines, kind of know what you have and know what you don't have, right? I mean, that is an assessment, you know, from a technology standpoint, especially. And then with respect to wireless, right, all technologies are somewhat different. So understand what the requirements are for the technology to be successful. You know, I caution all of my clients to be careful about drinking the Kool-Aid, right, of what a technology is. I mean, 5G is an amazing technology, but it's not the right solution in every set of circumstances. Mesh Wi-Fi is a great technology. We've had a number of successful deployments with it, but it's asset dependent on street lights and traffic signals. If you're in a community that only has a tower, then, you know, private LTE looks pretty attractive, right? Because, you know, homes are typically spaced apart. It doesn't have as much of the bandwidth requirements as, say, Mesh Wi-Fi does. So understand the technology first and foremost, and if it fits the application need. And then find good partners. And I'm not just talking about SmartWAVE. We're always a great partner, but find a good partner you can trust. And partners include more than the integrator or the entity that's going to be managing the service. Partners may be, your consultant you work with. Partners may be the utility company. Partners may be the city. Partners may be a nonprofit within your community that can contribute to the success of your program. So one thing that we have learned in building these community wireless broadband networks is it takes a village. And it's a lot of different entities coming together with a common goal of providing connectivity, that fourth utility of broadband within their neighborhoods. And we're here to support it day in, day out. And there's a certain methodology we follow. And one of the things we tell a lot of our clients as we go through that process is, look, whether you use us or not, you follow this process, you can create your roadmap to success. And that's that.
Awesome. Well, I think it goes without saying again that there's a massive opportunity of funding, opportunity up to new technology to really, I think we can all agree, we want to bring digital equity to everyone. I mean, that's the goal, right? And I want to thank, obviously, Jim and ERate ProfitWorks and coming on the show talking about this stuff. For more information about your services, you can go to erateprofitworks.com. Al, obviously, always a pleasure. If you want to learn more about SmartWAVE, you can go to smartwave.us and learn more about what his company does. And obviously, thanking our partner, CommScope Ruckus, for sponsoring this episode and learning a little bit more about ERate and the opportunities. Thank you both, gentlemen, for being on today, and looking forward to seeing what your collective businesses can do for education and communities.
Sounds great. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Jim,
Thanks,
thank
Nick.
you, sir.
Hey, take care.